Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for the time and attention that you have spent on this case. This is, as you can imagine, very important to Mr. Palmer. I do appreciate you listening to all the evidence, you listening to the lack of the evidence in this case, and I want to get into that evidence with you and how to apply that evidence to the law. But I want to make sure you understand the law that will apply to this case. The laws that I'm about to go over with you are part of the jury instructions that will be read by Judge Kelly to you whenever each side gets done with their closing arguments. You'll see them on the screen once I get that working, because I hit a button and messed it up. But this will be the same jury instructions that the judge will read to you, and you will also have those jury instructions when you go back during your deliberations. And then we will talk about how the evidence, or the lack of the evidence, applies to those instructions that you are required to follow. Now, the law says that the defendant is presumed innocent until he is proven guilty. The defendant enters upon the trial of this case with a presumption of innocence in his favor, and the presumption remains with him until it is overcome by the state with evidence which is sufficient to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty of the offense charged. A good way to think about the presumption of innocence is some type of suit, whether that be armor, whether that be the protective suits that members of a bomb squad wear, but it's something that covers the defendant absolutely from head to toe. It covers him throughout the entire trial, and it still exists with him today. And it is not enough for the state to merely present some evidence to maybe pierce the side of that armor or pierce the side of that bomb suit. The state has to present sufficient evidence that causes you to believe that every single piece of that armor, every single piece of that suit has been removed from the defendant, all the way from the helmet down to whatever boots or protective clothing over the feet. That is what the presumption of innocence means. The burden of proof: no person shall be convicted of any crime unless and until each element of the crime is, as charged, is proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, what does a reasonable doubt mean? The burden of proof rests upon the state to prove every material allegation of the indictment and every essential element of the crime or crimes charged beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is the state's burden. That is always the state's burden. And each and every element. You will hear from the judge what the elements of the crimes charged are. And if one element hasn't been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, but another one has, then you are required to find him not guilty. But that burden is on the state, and that is a super high burden. I told you before on opening statements that it's not 100%, it's not any type of mathematical certainty, and that's in here. But it is a high, high threshold that the state has to prove. For example, there's different levels of the burden of proof within the court of law. There is probable cause. That is typically what law enforcement needs in order to stop and detain you or to arrest an individual. Then there's the preponderance of the evidence. That means more likely than not. That means a 51% that is simply a slight tipping of the scales. That's not what we have here today. Presumption, or what did I say that was? That level, that tipping of the scales, that more likely than not, that does not apply to criminal trials. That is in civil trials, when you're trying to take away somebody's money, for example. Now then there's another burden of proof that falls in the middle, a clear and convincing. So it's not here, which is the simple 51%, 51-49. That's civil. Clear and convincing, we go to about here. That's what's required, like in defects cases, to take children away from parents. And there's other times when that clear and convincing, but that's just one example. But proof beyond a reasonable doubt is not just that slight tipping, that's not that medium tipping. It is tipping basically all the way down. That the state has shown that there's no reasonable explanation for the facts other than the defendant is guilty. And that is a super high burden. And we expect you to hold the state to that high burden. There is no burden on the defendant whatsoever, and the burden never shifts to the defendant to introduce evidence or to prove innocence. When a defense is raised by the evidence, the burden is on the state to negate or prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. There has been defenses raised in the course of this trial, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's the state's job, once a defense is raised, they have to disprove it. Now, what does a reasonable doubt mean? A reasonable doubt means just what it says. A reasonable doubt of a fair-minded, impartial juror, that's you, who is honestly seeking the truth. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon common sense and reason. You do not come into this putting aside your common sense and reason. That is, you're still allowed to consider your own common sense and reason in making your determination. But it is a doubt for which a reason can be given arising from a consideration of the evidence, a lack of the evidence, or a conflict in the evidence. Now, one of the things I told you during opening statements is that there is a lack of evidence in this case. And now you've seen that. The state hasn't proven anything. Now, after giving consideration to all of the facts and circumstances of the case, if your minds are wavering, your minds are unsettled, your minds are unsatisfied, then that is a doubt of the law. And you must acquit the defendant. If the state fails to prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning you're not satisfied, you haven't seen enough, your minds are wavering, your minds are unsettled, you are unsatisfied by the evidence that was presented by the state, it would be your duty to acquit the defendant. Now, this one is very applicable to this case. Facts and circumstances that merely place upon the defendant a grave suspicion of the crime charged, or that merely raise a speculation or conjecture of the defendant's guilt, are not sufficient to authorize a conviction of the defendant. Now, I'm not dumb, ladies and gentlemen. I know that there is suspicion here. Mr. Palmer and Miss Goodrich did have issues in the decade-long relationship that they had. Miss Goodrich was found dead here in Camden County, and Mr. Palmer was here in Camden County for just under 13 hours. So I understand how that creates some suspicion, but a suspicion alone, a speculation, because that's all the state's witnesses have done is speculate, is not sufficient to authorize a conviction of the defendant. Now, you will learn about direct and circumstantial evidence through the judge's charges. Direct evidence is typically that which somebody physically observed themselves. Like a witness testifies and says, I saw Jessica Goodrich deceased in Camden County. That is direct evidence. Circumstantial evidence is something that requires an inference or a leap. And there is no difference in the weight that you give direct evidence or circumstantial evidence. But you would be authorized to convict only if the evidence, whether direct, circumstantial, or both, excludes all reasonable theories of innocence and proves the guilt of the accused beyond a reasonable doubt. There are so many reasonable theories in this case that have not been excluded by the evidence. And we will talk about those shortly. Mere presence. A jury is not authorized to find a person who is merely present at the scene of the commission of the crime. At the time of its perpetration, guilty of consent in and concurrence in the commission of the crime. So just because they're there when a crime is happening does not mean without further evidence that you are authorized to find them guilty, unless the evidence shows beyond a reasonable doubt that such person committed the alleged crime, helped in the actual perpetration of the crime, or participated in the criminal endeavor. So how that applies here is just because Jason Palmer was in Woodbine for approximately 13 hours on October 6th to the early morning hours of October 7th, and Jessica Goodrich's body was found 36 hours later on October 8th, 2022 at approximately 2:11 p.m., just because he was in the same place and that a crime may have took place there, unless they have provided you with proof, you must acquit the defendant. Now, this is a list of all the evidence submitted to the crime lab and the analysis that was requested. And there's three sides of this. You heard Erica Rafferty testify as to what was submitted to the crime lab. She read out this entire list. You heard Nathan Daniel read out this entire list of evidence that was submitted to the crime lab. And additionally, what was requested in that analysis. Beach towel, beer can, pillowcase, boxers, empty water bottle with a cap, blue water bottle with a cap, water bottle no cap. Did you see any of these test results? No, none of them were presented. But you heard Erica Rafferty say that some results have been received. You heard Nathan Daniel say that some results have been received. You watched Erica Rafferty go through those results because she had left and moved from the Camden County Sheriff's Office to the St. Mary's Police Department along with Chief Galloway at some point while this case was pending. So she hadn't actually seen those results herself, but you actually saw her look at them and watch them. And no results have been submitted by the state. Continuation of the things sent to the crime lab that you have not seen results of. Pair of black rubberized gloves, teal in color knife, gray in color knife. Now those, there was DNA requested. You did hear about test results on those. Chief Galloway testified that there was a teal in color knife and a gray in color knife that was found in the defendant's truck. They were on some type of shelf or bunk bed. They were among food items. There was food containers on top of them, and that they appeared to be a standard chef's knife and a standard paring knife. And that while they were in Indiana, they did a presumptive test, and the presumptive test was negative. And then those were sent to the GBI crime lab, and the GBI crime lab was also negative. So that's the only time that you've heard any of the results. Tape lifts from her body taken at time of autopsy. You heard the medical examiner testify that he took tape lifts off Jessica Goodrich's body. And those tape lifts were of dark hair. And that those were submitted to the crime lab. But you haven't seen those lab results. And if those lab results tied back to the defendant, don't you think the state would have showed you? Black and one shorts. On shorts is what appears to be a bloody fingerprint. Requested analysis, fibers, hair analysis, latent prints, DNA. You have not seen the results of this examination. Had they tied back to the defendant, the state would have introduced them. Sealed sexual assault collection kit. Requested analysis, DNA. You have not seen results. If they tied back to the defendant, you would have seen it. Fingernail scrapings. Now, you heard some evidence from some of the witnesses, like Erica Rafferty and Lieutenant Daniel, that they believe, based on their training and experience, and I think maybe Chief Galloway had said this as well, can't recall exactly, but based on their training and experience in law enforcement, and all of them had several years in law enforcement, that it appeared that the body was cleaned. But you also heard from Dr. Lehman, who has a medical degree, who has performed thousands of autopsies, who was certified as an expert in this case, who said to him, his expert opinion was there was not a lot of evidence that the body was cleaned. You heard from Lieutenant Daniel and Erica Rafferty that there would have been more blood. That's not what Dr. Lehman testified. He said that she bled internally. There may have been some outward blood, but he can't say a lot of it. But he did find blood internally at both of the wound sites, including 800 milliliters inside of her chest cavity. But either way, you did hear from both Rafferty and Daniel that it was their opinion she was clean. But in the autopsy report, her fingernails were dirty. Dr. Lehman testified to that. You saw that on the autopsy report when it was placed on the screen. Her fingernails were dirty. They went through the putting bags on her hand. And I asked Dr. Lehman, what was that for? To preserve the evidence. That's what he responded. They went through all the trouble of putting those bags on her hand. They took clippings and scrapings under her fingernails. And Dr. Lehman said that was put into evidence at the GBI crime lab to be submitted for further processing. You have not seen any results. If it tied back to Mr. Palmer, you would have seen it. But what you have seen is some video from Chevron, and I'll play it in just a second. But the relevance of this video, that first of all, this was from October 7th, 2022. Both Erica Rafferty and Nathan Daniel testified about the video. It was played during Erica Rafferty. That this was from October 7th of 2022 at 11:30 p.m. that the occupants of this vehicle were suspicious because they had been fighting at the gas station. And you also heard from Nathan Daniel. I asked him, what's the significance of October 7th at 11:30 p.m.? And he told you that there were individuals on scene on 10/8 that were interviewed. Ariel Gonzalez, Trujillo, both were Spanish speaking. They had to call in an officer from the Kingsland Police Department to conduct an interview with them. And evidence was introduced that they indicated that there was a Chevy Silverado or other similar type truck pull into the grassy area leading up to the path where Jessica Goodrich was found on October 7th at between the hours of 11 p.m. and midnight. You also heard the painstaking effort that law enforcement went through to try to identify who that truck was registered to. They went so far as to get a complete list of all the blue Chevy Silverados registered in the state of Georgia. And they ran those names, and they pulled up their pictures, and they lined it out based off of female, based off of African American, because the man we saw associated with this truck was a white male. And they even identified sometimes when the individual was a sex offender. Law enforcement thought that this truck was significant enough to be one of the only videos that was recovered in this case, was saved in this case. Because you heard that they spent hours trying to copy the videos so they could have it at their own office and go through it and analyze it. And they eventually just took the hard drive. And when they attempted to copy the hard drive, they reformatted it, which deleted everything. They went through efforts to send that to NCIS to try to recover something. They were only able to recover, I believe it was like 16 images or something like that. But they knew the video is very important in this case But this is the one video that they saved. And this is 10/7 that the video happened. And they discover the body on 10/8. What does that say there under the video? That says yesterday. So this video was saved by law enforcement on 10/8, on the day Jessica Goodrich's body was found. They identified a suspect vehicle. But as soon as they attempted to locate that person and learned Jason Palmer's name, they completely abandoned this. Now, when that truck drove by, and Nathan Daniel testified about this, in the back of that blue, gray, black, dark-colored Chevy Silverado, there's a tote, a black tote. You can see the little red handles on it, and there's a blue cooler. That's large enough to fit a 5'4" individual that weighs 150 pounds, which that's what the medical examiner says is the description of Jessica Goodrich. 5'4", about 150 pounds. And that truck, or at least a truck like it, at about between 11 and midnight, pulled into the grassy area of that wooded trail where Jessica was found, with their headlights facing forward down the path. Did you hear about anything else suspicious on that path that law enforcement found that indicated somebody driving into the woods at 11:30 at night? No. That could have been whoever that driver of that blue, black, dark-colored Chevy Silverado dumping Jessica's body. And that's the picture of the driver of that truck. And he appears to have gray hair. But that is not Jason Palmer in that picture. Now, during the state's opening, they told you that they were going to prove certain things that the evidence would show during the course of this trial. That Jessica Goodrich was murdered here in Camden County. That on 10/7/2022, Palmer and Goodrich traveled north from the villages near Wildwood, Florida, to Camden County. That they arrived in Woodbine just around after the noon hour on October 7th, and that those timelines were confirmed through their truck data and cell phone data. That pings ceased for a time being on October 7th, when neither Goodrich or Palmer pinged on any satellite tower until October 8th. And it was Palmer only that pinged on October 8th, but that there was a silence with regards to pinging from Wildwood to exit 14 in Georgia. And Jessica Goodrich's body was found approximately 13 hours after Palmer left Woodbine. Did the state prove any of those things to you? No. The evidence showed exactly what I told you the evidence was going to show on opening. That the state had their timeline all wrong, and really, Palmer left Wildwood, Florida in the morning of October 6th. He arrived in Woodbine, Georgia on the afternoon of October 6th. That, yes, he was here for approximately 13 hours. That at least lines up. But that he left about 2 a.m. on October 7th and traveled north. "2 a.m. on October 7th is prior to 11 p.m., 12 p.m. that evening on October 7th. That's a whole 12 hours or so before this Chevy Silverado, suspicious vehicle, people fighting in the gas station. But you saw all of Palmer's truck logs, all 52 pages of them have been submitted for you as Defense Exhibit 3, and you will have access to these to assist you in your deliberation. Mr. Palmer explained to you how to kind of read these, what it means by the D and the SB, the sleeper berth, the drive time. The on means that even though he's not driving, he's still working, and the off, which is his off-duty time, and that off and that sleeper berth are interchangeable. He can just be off-duty and sleep while he's off-duty if he wants to, or when he is sleeping, he can put himself in sleeper berth. But all these records will be available to you to check out the timeline yourself. But the state didn't get it right in this case. The cell phone data also showed that there was a ping on October 6th in Wildwood for Jason Palmer. And then there was a ping just above Wildwood on the morning of October 6th for Jason Palmer. And then there was 3 pings in Woodbine, Georgia on October 6th by Jason Palmer. So there was no silence with regard to pinging. I think the state was trying to say that, and I'm just assuming here, that because there was no pings, he was trying to hide the fact that he was in Woodbine or something along those lines, or he was too busy to be using his phone or something along those lines. But there was a ping when he's in Wildwood, there's a ping on his way from Wildwood, and there's multiple pings here in Woodbine. There was nothing to hide. He was using his phone. The state didn't prove anything that they promised to you they were going to prove. And that's what the evidence actually showed. I'm not going to read that back through, except for I will point out that based off of the cell phone evidence, which the cell phone evidence showed that Jason Palmer on October 7th was in South Carolina, and on 10/8 in South Carolina, consistent with his truck logs, consistent with his testimony that when he stopped at Woodbine and slept and took a break for about 12, 13 hours, that he continued on with the load that he was supposed to deliver in South Carolina. The evidence also showed that Jessica's last ping was October 5th in Wildwood. Now, the state made a big deal about how Jason Palmer and Jessica Goodrich left Woodbine left Wildwood together and traveled to Woodbine. There is absolutely no evidence that has been presented that Jessica Goodrich traveled alive to Woodbine. And there is absolutely no evidence that has been presented that Jason Palmer is the one that brought Jessica Goodrich to Woodbine. Now, I want to go through some of these witnesses with you. And I think for the most part, I haven't had to refer to my notes too much because the PowerPoint has done that for me. But we are about to go right off track. So bear with me as I come over here and grab my next thing and my notes. There's been a lot of evidence presented here. I'm sure you guys have had an issue keeping track of everything. That's why you have your notepads. The same thing happens with these attorneys, trying to keep track of everything that has come out on that stand. But I'm going to briefly go over some of what each witness has testified to. Michael Scotto, that was the individual who was walking his dog. He discovered Jessica. That's not really in dispute. But he did find her around 2:11 p.m. That's when, 2 o'clock p.m. The phone call to 911 was made at 2:11 p.m. And he had found her within about 10 to 15 minutes prior to the call. Okay, not much out of Michael Scotto. Casey Miller, that was the 911 operator. They played the 911 call, and you hear the store clerk, I think Andrea was her name, as she's describing there was a body located, we need assistance, and who found her and how long ago they had found her, etc. But Casey Miller confirmed that it was 2:11 p.m. when the call was created at the Camden County 911 Center. Lieutenant Erica Rafferty. Now, we've talked a little bit about what Erica Rafferty testified to, but I'm going to go in more detail. Now, one of the first responses she gave is when you have this type of crime, when you locate a body, who's your suspect? She said everyone is a suspect. Everyone. And that is true. Everyone who visited the gas station from 10:05, because remember, that is the last time Jessica's cell phone pings. That is the last time anybody had contact with her. It's the last time Jason had contact with her. That's the last time Katie Muller had contact with her, was on the evening of October 5th. So basically everybody who visited the Exit 14 gas station between October 5th, 2022, when the last contact with Jessica is made by any person, to 10:08 at about 2 p.m. when her body is located, every single one of those people are suspects. And you heard, I don't know if it was really from Erica, but I know for sure it was from Lieutenant Daniel and Chief Galloway, that is a busy gas station, that it is busy at all times of day. People are coming in and out. This is a gas station on a major thoroughfare off of I-95. Just goes all the way north to south down the United States. And that this is the only truck stop between exit 7 and exit 29. So there was tons of people that visited that gas station within that, I would say, 2 days, 2.5 days, if we're really getting technical. There is as much evidence against all of those people who visited the gas station between that time frame, between those dates on 10/5 and 10/8, than there is against Jason Palmer when it comes to physical evidence, when it comes to direct evidence. There's no physical evidence that the crime was committed in Camden County, meaning that she was killed in Camden County. Now, law enforcement kept insisting on that. We know that she wasn't killed in the spot she was found, but we know that she was killed in Camden County, because we got to say that. But each law enforcement witness testified that there was no secondary crime scene. meaning no other place where they found blood or evidence of a struggle to indicate that this is where the crime occurred, and then the body was drugged, because there is evidence that the body was drugged. That came out from Dr. Liam. Drugged from that spot to the spot where her body lay. But they had to assume and speculate that the crime actually occurred here, the killing actually occurred here, because they had no evidence that occurred anywhere else. That's the only reason they said that it occurred here. But you also heard that nobody went down to Wildwood, Florida. Nobody went down to Wildwood, Florida. The last place that Jessica Goodrich's cell phone pinged. You heard that they had plans to go down to Wildwood, Florida, and then they abandoned those plans. There is no evidence that Jason Palmer committed the crimes charged in Camden County or elsewhere, just that he was a suspect. Erica Rafferty testified, everybody's a suspect. Then they went and did these interviews and talked to the family, and they decided that he's a suspect because they had traveled together and because they had some prior difficulties in the past. Those are the only things that link Jason Palmer to this killing, whether the killing occurred in Wildwood or in Camden or somewhere else unknown. That the family identified him as a suspect. They were traveling together. They had prior difficulties. You haven't seen anything else pointing to Jason Palmer as the suspect, or to prove that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, Lieutenant Nathan Daniel also testified. No secondary crime scene in Woodbine or Camden County. No crime scene in Wildwood, where the last ping on Jessica's phone was located, because nobody went to Wildwood. There's actually been no evidence presented that anybody even bothered to call the Wildwood Police Department or whatever county that is in Florida to see, hey, did you find any blood at this Pilot gas station? Could you maybe canvass the area, talk to anybody to see if they remember seeing this woman here on 10-5, her cell phone pinged here. She was later found dead in our county. You didn't hear any evidence that they even contacted the local law enforcement down in Wildwood, nonetheless went to Wildwood themselves. You haven't heard anything about law enforcement trying to search for her belongings or identification. You heard Jason testify that she had a wallet, she had credit cards, she had a cell phone. You heard Pamela Shays testify that Jessica had her own source of income. She was on Social Security. She had her own bank card. She had access to her money, and she had a cell phone. You heard Rick Goodrich, Jojo, testify that his mother had a cell phone. But nobody even bothered to try to look for these items. I think it would be a pretty reasonable thing to do is go back to the place where the cell phone last pinged to try to find the cell phone and maybe find out who actually committed this crime. Not just, oh, we know they traveled together. We know that they had a history. And we're just going to be satisfied with our investigation from that point. So that's basically what happened here. Law enforcement didn't attempt to speak with any witnesses in Wildwood, didn't do anything to actually confirm whether Jessica left Wildwood with Jason or not. Didn't find any witnesses, videos, or photos indicating Jessica was ever alive in Camden County. So there's no proof that she was killed here. There's no proof she was killed in Wildwood, but she was killed somewhere. But we know for sure that there's no secondary crime scene here in Camden County. And nobody went to Wildwood to prove whether or not there was a crime scene there. So she could have been killed there, or she could have been killed at any location within that, I believe, 176 miles between them. But you know what has been proven? She was not killed in Jason Palmer's truck. You heard from James Galloway that they located Jason Palmer on 10/26/2022. That him and Captain Cheney with the Camden County Sheriff's Office traveled to Indiana to effect the arrest warrants that they had pulled on Jason Palmer. That they found him pretty easily because of his GPS that was on his truck. And Jason was still taking assignments and loads from Hirschbach. And Hirschbach, his trunking company, is who gave the GPS data to them. So continuing to work with them, continuing on every day like normal. They're able to easily locate Jason with his GPS. They take him into custody, and then they take his truck into custody, and they effectuate a search warrant on the truck. They search the truck. They don't find much in the truck. They do find some tank tops. They find some and one shorts. They find some knives. Again, those knives were presumptively negative for blood. They were sent to the GBI crime lab. The GBI crime lab confirmed they were negative for blood. They sprayed luminol in various locations throughout the truck. And they did not find any evidence of blood. And they did not find any evidence that blood had been cleaned. You also heard James Galloway testify that the only reason he concluded that the crimes were committed in Camden was solely because the victim's body was here. That he could not conclusively determine an exact time of death nor an approximate time of death, even though he's a coroner. And you heard Dr. Liam say the same thing. I walked him through the march of rigor of what typically happens. 1 to 2 hours is onset, 12 hours, then another 12 hours, etc. But he can't make an accurate estimation in this case because there's so many factors that were present here that influences and speeds up decomposition. And then her body is placed into a freezer at the morgue, and that slows down decomposition. And the autopsy was performed about a week after she was found. So he was not able to give an accurate estimation on the time of death. And neither could Chief Galloway. Chief Galloway also stated that once the victim was identified and they went up to the family in Massachusetts, Jason Palmer became the sole suspect, and that's even though everybody else at that truck stop between 10:05 and 10:08 is a suspect. They said, oh, we got one. Let's just focus on this guy, and took a very myopic approach to this investigation. And even though they had that blue truck guy, Chevy guy, suspicious, arguing in the gas station, pulling in to the wooded path, facing forward with their headlights, and there's no other suspicious thing found in the back of that woods, they completely abandoned those other theories. But also, Nathan Daniel and Chief Galloway testified both that that was a busy gas station. I think I covered most of this already. But the significance of it being a busy gas station is that you've got numerous people coming and going at all times of the day. The gas station's open 24 hours. But not one person witnessed this. You heard Dr. Liam testify that there was evidence and injuries on her body that were sustained post-mortem, likely from dragging. And that her body was found, I think James Galloway said 20 yards into the woods. That's not really a short distance. And nobody saw that happening at a truck stop when truckers are coming and going at all times of the day. And if the crime occurred, if the killing actually occurred in Camden County, you heard Dr. Liam testify that it took minutes for Jessica Goodrich to pass. That the chest wound went into her lung, caused her lung to collapse, caused her to bleed internally, and then that she later died from a lack of oxygen because she couldn't breathe. And it took minutes. You also heard him testify that there were defensive wounds. And through some of the other witnesses, you have heard that Jessica was scrappy, that Jessica would have fought back. And there's evidence that she did. So you're telling me that there was no one that heard screaming, saw dragging, nothing? No, they didn't see it in Camden County. And then law enforcement didn't bother to go down to Wildwood, Florida to see if anybody found anything there. But we know for sure nobody saw Jason Palmer stab her. There's no videos of him stabbing her. There's no photos of him stabbing her. There's no witnesses of him stabbing her in Wildwood, in Camden, wherever. There's no direct evidence against Jason Palmer. There's no physical evidence against Jason Palmer. There's a suspicion, there's a speculation, and like you saw the laws earlier, the rules that you will have to follow, your instructions that the judge is going to give you, a grave suspicion, speculation, conjecture is not enough to authorize a conviction. Now let's talk about the testimony of I've spent a lot of time on our law enforcement witnesses. But let's talk about our two family members that testified. Rick Jojo Goodrich and Pamela Shays. Rick Jojo Goodrich was Jessica's son. You heard him testify about this text message that he received from Jason Palmer, but he couldn't recall exactly what the text message showed. He couldn't recall whether Jason said, I got her a plane ticket or a train ticket or a bus ticket, or whether I just got her the money for that. And he told you he's not going to be able to recall it unless you show him the message. You saw him on the stand looking around for the message because he thought that it was in front of him on the screen, or maybe one of the things that had been handed to him earlier. And I had to tell him, it hasn't been submitted as evidence. It's not there. You're not going to find it looking for it. And he couldn't recall from his own memory. That's fine. It happened 2 years ago. That doesn't mean that it's untrustworthy when you don't remember something that minute from 2 years ago. But we did hear from Nathan Daniel that he saw that text message. And that text message says that Jason Palmer told JoJo that I gave her money for a hotel and a ticket. Money for a hotel and a ticket. That's also consistent with what Jessica Mueller says Jason told her. I gave her, she got out of my truck, she got a hotel, she went back home, whatever. And you saw that text message, and that's in evidence. Not going to try to find it. You will have that message back there yourself. And you compare the testimony of Rick Goodrich combined with Nathan Daniel for that point, because Mr. Goodrich couldn't recall, but Nathan Daniel filled in the blanks. And compare that and see if it's consistent with the text message that was sent to Katie Mueller. But they are. They are not verbatim, but they're consistent. They both say she got out of my truck, Wildwood, Florida, pilot. She had money for a hotel. She had money for transportation. Now, you also heard Rick Goodrich say, and some of this is through his own testimony, but also through Nathan Daniel recounting what he had previously told law enforcement. And one of the instructions that you're going to be provided by the judge tells you to weigh that there's sometimes when a witness gives something inconsistent and whether it can be reasonably explained. I understand why JoJo may not remember exactly what was said in that interview. That interview occurred on 10/20/2022, the day after he found out his mother was dead. He's not going to remember every single thing he said in that interview. So when I asked him, do you recall making statements about your mother being untruthful? He said, I don't recall. When I asked him, do you remember what you said about those text messages, those pictures that you got from your mom on 9/30 where she said she was choked? He said, I didn't recall. That's okay. He may not remember. That's fine. But Nathan Daniel filled in the blanks for us. And he told you that in that interview, JoJo did make statements about his mother being untruthful. That she would say things in a voice sometimes that he didn't believe. And that she was manipulative. That she would try to get people on her side. And once she thought she had you on her side, her stories would get bigger and bigger. That is what Rick Goodrich told to Nathan Daniel and Erica Rafferty on October 20th, 2022. And it's Nathan Daniel that told you that. Now, and then about this text message, about the choking. That text message was submitted into evidence by the state saying stuff about, oh, Jason choked me. And this, I think, was September 30th of 2022. And you heard through Nathan Daniel what JoJo said about that text message. That text message saying that Jason choked me was accompanied by a buttload of pictures. And that when JoJo saw those pictures, he thought she did it to herself, to be honest. That's what JoJo said in his interview to law enforcement on October 20th about those pictures. That his mother had a history for lying, she was manipulative, and because of that and what he knows about his mother, she thought she did it to herself. Because she's trying to get JoJo on her side. And if she did get him on her side, the story would be bigger and bigger. You also heard from Pamela Shays, Jessica's sister. And same thing applies to JoJo. She's not going to remember every single thing she said in that interview. She had just found out her sister died the day before. And I'm sure she was probably emotional at that time on the 19th, on the 20th, finding out that you lost a family member and that you kicked out that family member from your own home, that you blocked that family member and didn't have contact with them. But she did tell law enforcement, and this came out through Nathan Daniel as well, that her sister had a problem with lying. Her sister had a problem with alcohol, and that because her sister had a problem with alcohol, she tried to get her sober. But when Jessica wouldn't follow the rules, she kicked her out of her house. You also heard from Jason Palmer that the reason why Jessica was with him was because Jessica had no place to go. She had been evicted, and this came out from Palmer as well as Katie Muller, as well as Pamela Shays, that Jessica Goodrich had been evicted, went to move with an aunt. The aunt kicked her out, threw out all of her clothes. That's why she had to be wearing some of Jason's clothes. Moved in with Pamela. Pamela kicked her out. And that Jessica called Jason for help. I expect the state is probably going to talk a lot about planning. You heard them on their direct about, oh, you're a planner. You plan these trips. Yeah. But Jason never planned to go pick up Jessica. Him and Jessica had been broken up for years. She called him. She asked him for help, and he said sure. So at that point, he did make plans to go pick her up. But at no point was there any plans to kill her. You also heard from Pamela Shays that it was not inconsistent. It's nothing new to her to hear that Jessica gets loud and yells when she's drinking. So the behavior that Katie Muller observed on the evening of October 5th, when she is on a phone call with Jessica Goodrich at about 7 p.m. that evening, where Jessica is being loud and screaming, so loud to the point that she can't hear Jason Palmer in the background because he's talking low and calm and cool and collected. He's not freaking out, Jessica is. And Katie Muller told you that during that phone conversation that she had with Jessica, when she's yelling and screaming, when Jessica had called her because she's like, hey, I got stuff to tell you, call me, we got to talk about Jason, and they made up. That during that conversation, Jessica says, I'm going to get out of his truck. I'm leaving him. I'm going back to Massachusetts. There's no reason not to believe the testimony of Katie Muller. There's nothing that she said that was inconsistent with any of the evidence that has been presented. She was a witness that was called by the state. I didn't call her. I didn't bring her all the way down from here from Massachusetts. That was the state. She was the state's witness. I'm sure the state is going to say something about, oh, well, Katie Muller is biased because she loves Jason and she still loves Jason. You can love somebody and still believe in the oath that you take when you take that jury stand and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, which is what you saw Katie do. So I submit to you that her statements are truthful and that what she told you lines up with everything that happened in this case later. Another thing that you learned from Katie Muller is that at some point Jason had a third knife. There was only 2 knives recovered in his truck. He had 1 knife. But that the last time that she had saw that knife was probably the first time she was in the truck with him in May of 2021. And it was not too long after that where she spent 2 weeks with Jason in the truck in May of 21. And then at the end of 2021, early June 21, her and Jason make plans to move to Indiana. That just like any other person would when they're moving out of an apartment or a house, they cleaned out the truck. Jason removed every piece of personal property from the truck. He left it behind for it to be repossessed. And he was going to get a new job and establish a new life in Indiana. So that knife that was typically kept in the driver's side door, per Katie, per Jason, was removed from his truck. And Katie says the last time she saw the knife was May of 21. Jason told you that the last time he saw the knife was when he removed it from his truck in May 21, early June 21, when they made the move to Indiana. And he believes he lost it at some point. It is entirely reasonable to lose something in a move, whether you are just moving from down the street, whether you are moving from St. Mary's to Kingsland, or whether you're moving halfway across the country. Now, from Katie, now I do want to address this. So I did address the fact that in Katie's interview, she told law enforcement the last time she saw the knife was September of 2021. But then her testimony yesterday was that she saw the knife the last time in May of 21. And I asked her, why is your statement different now? Why did that change? And she said, well, after I got to thinking about it, I remember seeing the knife on our trip to Chicago. I had never been to Chicago before, and I know that we went to Chicago during that first trip in May and not in September. She specifically remembers the event where she saw the knife in Chicago because it was at a point where Jason was making threats to harm himself. That has sufficient indicia of reliability. That has trustworthiness because she's telling you exactly where she remembers it happening. Chicago. Why she remembers it happening there. That's the first time she had ever been to Chicago. And that what was happening when she saw the knife when Jason was threatening to harm himself. Okay. So another thing that you learned from Katie is that her and Jason had been together since about April of 2021, and she had been on several trips with him. And even though she didn't have trips with him, she also saw him on various locations or various times. So the first time was April of 2021, then May of 2021, went to Indiana in May of 21, then again in September of 21, Then they saw each other at the end of February 2022, and that was during a time that Jason took off work to have bereavement so they can grieve the loss of their stillborn child together. But it was during that time in February of 2022, she was in a position in his truck next to the driver's side door where she could have seen the knife and she didn't see it. Now, she admitted, I didn't look specifically down. I can't tell you that over 2 years ago that I 100% for sure looked down and didn't see the knife in that pocket. But she was in a position where she could have seen it and she didn't see it. And then she told you on March 14th, 2022, that's the last time she had seen Jason in person. She gave him a gift card, and she also gave them the urn that contained the ashes of their stillborn child. And she was in a position near the driver's side door to see that knife where Jason typically kept it, and she didn't see it during that visit either. Katie told you that Jason was a very caring boyfriend, that she struggles with diabetes and hypoglycemia, and that he would keep sugar packets in his truck for her, just in case she almost passed out because her blood sugar dropped too low. That he would cook food for her, and that during these trips with him, he took such good care of her and fed her healthy foods and got her on the road and out in the open. That when she came home, she had lost weight and her A1C had decreased. She also told you that Jason was a very caring boyfriend and that he wouldn't let her get out of the truck if she was between two trucks without him. That he would either come around and help her get out of the truck, or he would have her get out his side of the truck. Because otherwise she could get napped. She could get kidnapped. She could get hurt because crazy things happen at truck stops. And the most important thing that you heard from Katie Muller is that Jason has made threats against her. She didn't lie about that. He says a lot of things. He gets drunk, he starts running his mouth. But at no point has he ever gotten physical with her, struck her, hit her, harmed her, threw anything at her, never got physical. That Jason would run his mouth like a lot of people do when they're drunk, when they're drinking. Like that he would run his mouth when Jessica, just like Jessica would when she was drunk, when she was drinking. But that Jason never once laid a hand on her. That one time he got in her face. But otherwise, Jason had not laid a hand on her. And what did she say in response? That Jason was all bark and no bite. Now, how's that relevant to some of the other evidence? Because you've heard evidence of a threat that Jason made back in 2020. Because the state thinks that proving a threat was made in 2020 is somehow relevant to the issues that we are on trial for today that happened in 2022. But you heard information about an alleged threat that Jason made to Jessica in 2020. But Katie told you that Jason is all bark and no bite. Let's talk about Victoria Crosby a little bit more. That's where the threat came out through. Victoria Crosby is the fiance of Kevin Goodrich. Kevin Goodrich is the son of Jessica Goodrich. But Kevin Goodrich hadn't had contact with his mom 3 years prior to her death in 2019. But we're expected to believe that Victoria continued to have contact with her otherwise in 2020, in April of 2020, when this message is allegedly sent. Victoria couldn't tell you when the last time she had talked to Jessica before that. You didn't get any messages that showed the conversation before that or the conversation after that, or unlike every other message that has been introduced into evidence where it shows an actual date where the message is occurring. Like these that say September 30th at the top. Like these that say September 30th. Like this that says October 10th. That message that was introduced by the state has no date on it. And by the way, these that I just showed you, these are all defense exhibits. And I didn't just show you one text message, I gave you the entire conversation. Because I'm not trying to hide anything from you here. But the state is. They only give you one text message at a time. They don't show you the dates of that text message. They don't show you the complete conversation or the context of it. But that one picture from Victoria Crosby that was allegedly sent, according to her, around April of 2020, but it doesn't have a date on it, but she admits that the actual screenshot of the text message was just created on July 5th of 2024. And she described the circumstances surrounding when she created that screenshot. That they were having a discussion with the state. She made mention of that text message. The state didn't have it. So they called her back after they had hung up and asked her to send it. And that was July 5th of 2024 that was sent. Why is that relevant? Because you also heard from her that was sent from a different Facebook profile than what law enforcement had identified as Jessica Goodrich's. You also heard from Nathan Daniel that at no point in that interview that took place with law enforcement, or interviews rather, on 10/19, 10/20, 10/21 of 2022, did Victoria ever mention that threat. At no point did he ever receive that text message. Now, he did admit that Erica was primarily in charge of receiving and collecting those text messages, but he took over as the lead case agent. He would know what's in his investigative file, and he had never seen that text message before. Why is that? And he also confirmed that that was a different Facebook profile than what they identified. And that they had gotten returns from those Facebook profiles. They confirmed that through Nathan Daniel, and they even submitted that evidence for the record on a disk. But that was a different Facebook profile than what law enforcement had identified, and we could tell that from the profile picture, and Victoria admitted that to you, without any further explanation. Why is that relevant? In the world of AI, you can create anything. And there's no verification, number one, that that text message is even what Victoria is purporting it to be. Number two,
Your Honor, I am going to object and ask for a sidebar.
Okay.